Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective. I've been talking in recent videos about John MacArthur and Grace Community Church's defense against the California government's restrictions because the California government has placed restrictions on churches meeting indoors and has actually told Grace Community Church that they could face fines and possible imprisonment for failing to meet the guidelines that the government has imposed. And so a lot of us, our understanding was that Grace Community Church was putting together a legal defense team in case the government really tried to crack down on them. But I just heard today it was announced that actually John MacArthur and the elders of Grace Community Church are suing Governor Gavin Newsom. And the article here that I see from discern.com says, Pastor John MacArthur and Grace Community Church sue State of California Governor Newsom, Mayor Garcetti over church closure. So it's not just that John MacArthur and his church are playing defense, they're actually going on the offense here, and they are suing the state of California. And in that article from discern.com, there is a link to the lawsuit, so you can read the whole thing. There's a lot of documentation, but I thought in this video we would just look at some of it just to get a sense of what the case is about. So here's the lawsuit document here, and I'll let you look at it quickly here with me just to see kind of the preliminary stuff. And it does have an introduction here, and let me read some of it. Under point 2 it says, here the American people have begun to see that they are being kicked by their own government. They have witnessed how the onerous restrictions imposed on them by public officials to allegedly fight the COVID-19 pandemic simply do not apply to certain favored groups when many went to the streets to engage in political or peaceful protests purportedly against racism and police brutality. These protesters refused to comply with the pandemic restrictions. Instead of enforcing the public health orders, public officials were all too eager to grant a de facto exception for these favored protesters. These same public officials have even encouraged these protesters to express their rage so the public could hear it. Indeed, this rage was felt by many innocent bystanders and protesters who became victims of violence, looting, destruction of property, and even fatal attacks. And whereas the general public was required to wear face masks whenever they went out in public, protesters and rioters were often given a pass by officials. Of course, these protests could have been shut down, just like California shut down churches. Indeed, when peaceful protests against California's stay-at-home orders occurred at the state capitol, Governor Newsom was quick to shut them down. This favoritism has caused a huge loss of confidence by the American people in their government leaders, public health officials, and the pandemic restrictions. Public officials' direct encouraging of favored groups to ignore the pandemic restrictions has caused amazing harm. As explained by Los Angeles County's public health director, the George Floyd protests caused a spike in coronavirus cases in June and July 2020. But the current spike does not result solely from the protests. Rather, as explained by a COVID-19 planning expert, the second cause of the spike is mitigation fatigue and the widespread decision by individuals in the age 20 to 50 demographic group to stop obeying pandemic restrictions. Going down to point 9, in June and July, attempting to fight this spike, California targeted the wrong groups. California first lifted restrictions on gatherings that occurred outdoors, blessing after the fact the illegal conduct of the George Floyd protesters. California then banned singing in worship services and then shut them all down, unless they could modify their services to operate identically to the now legal protests. This blatant favoritism has not only led to spikes and a loss of confidence by the American people, but it has also resulted in forceful decisions by courts addressing these constitutional violations. One court recently enjoined New York Governor Cuomo and New York Mayor de Blasio from enforcing coronavirus regulations against places of worship differently from other places. Going down to number 12, having irreparably damaged the confidence of Americans, and Californians especially, who now realize that the pandemic restrictions are neither necessary nor good, on Sunday, July 26, 2020, Grace Community Church decided to resume worship services, joining millions of Americans in deciding that enough is enough. With deaths from the COVID-19 suicide pandemic exceeding those from the actual coronavirus pandemic, Grace Community Church decided that it would no longer sit by and watch its members and their children suffer from an absence of essential religious worship and instruction. Perhaps unsurprisingly, perhaps not, this led the County of Los Angeles to submit a demand letter to Grace Community Church ordering it to comply with the restrictions that the Los Angeles County deems unnecessary to enforce against so many others. Grace Community Church does not intend to comply. Down to point 20, Plaintiff John MacArthur is a resident of the County of Los Angeles, California. He has served as the pastor-teacher of Grace Community Church for over 50 years and is a member of the church's Board of Elders. Pastor MacArthur sues in his official capacity as pastor-teacher of Grace Community Church and as representative of the church's 42-member Board of Elders. Number 21, defendant Gavin Newsom is sued in his official capacity as the Governor of California. The California Constitution vests the supreme executive power of the state in the governor, who shall see that the law is faithfully executed. Governor Newsom signed the relevant executive orders. And then it goes on to name some other defendants associated with the California government. So that was all in the introduction. It does give some background here. And interestingly, under point 55, further on May 22nd, 2020, President Donald Trump held a press briefing. During that press briefing, President Trump stated, "Today I am identifying houses of worship, churches, synagogues, and mosques as essential places that provide essential services." So I read quite a bit there just to give you a real sense of the lawsuit that they're bringing against the state of California. And the sense that I got from reading this is that the case is basically built on the premise that the protesters were allowed to meet in California, which was one of the things that caused a coronavirus spike. And in the meantime, churches have been restricted and ordered to follow the government guidelines, and were not being treated the same as protesters. And so this is really a case of discrimination. Under one of the claims for relief in this document, it says, number 153, under Article 1 of the California Constitution, people have the right to come together, to assemble freely, and to exercise freely and enjoy their religion without discrimination or preference. Plaintiffs are being treated differently from other similarly situated groups and people who are assembling and exercising their constitutional rights under Article 1 of the California Constitution. Defendants admitted that religious worshipers were similarly situated to political protesters when it created a uniform regime to similarly regulate both activities starting on May 25th, 2020. So you can see there the case being made that there is discrimination at play here in the difference between how churches have been treated versus protesters. Another charge that's being brought out in this document is a violation of California constitutional rights. And it's something that MacArthur has talked about, that the California government doesn't have the right to declare churches of worship non-essential. Number 158, defendants intentionally and arbitrarily categorize entities, individuals, and conduct as either essential or non-essential. Those entities and persons classified as essential or as participating in essential services are permitted to go about their business and activities. Those classified as non-essential or as engaging in non-essential activities are required to stay home unless it becomes necessary for them to leave for one of the enumerated essential activities. Requiring plaintiffs to abstain from religious worship violates their California constitutional equal protection rights. Plaintiffs have no adequate remedy at law and will suffer serious and irreparable harm to their constitutionally protected rights unless defendants are enjoined from implementing and enforcing the worship bans. So that really gets to the heart of this case, that the government is engaging in discriminatory activity and that it is really going to cause irreparable harm to churches if they continue to make restrictions in the way that they are. MacArthur is also charging that these California restrictions do not further the interest of the highest order, and that's here, number 122, defendants' mandates do not further an interest of the highest order for the simple fact that, as explained above, the cure has become more deadly than the disease. The COVID-19 suicide pandemic is greater than the COVID-19 pandemic. Wow. So those are really interesting, strong, powerful points that are being made in this case. And really what I see here is that basically MacArthur and the elders of Grace Community Church are suing to receive relief from the California government's restrictions. In other words, they do not want these restrictions to be enforced on them, and they want to have those restrictions declared a violation of the California Constitution so that those restrictions will no longer be in place upon churches in California. So they really have gone on the offense here. It's very fascinating to look at the case that they're making. I know a lot of people watching this video are very supportive and are hoping that they will win, but it will be interesting to see how all of this plays out. I just wanted to bring this to your attention. I just found out about this a couple of hours ago, and I know the news is going to spread. So I wanted to share a little bit about this with you so you could see exactly what the document looks like. I'll leave a link to that document in the description below this video, and you can read the entire thing if you want to, but I will tell you that all the documentation is well over 500 pages long. And I really didn't have enough time to look into all of that in this video. This might have even been too much information for some of you, but again, I find it fascinating and helpful to actually look at what the information really is. So I hope you found this interesting. I'd like to hear what you think about all of this in the comments below, but please try to keep that comment section positive and edifying. But as always, thank you so much for listening to what I have to say from A Frisch Perspective.